about that, everyone. I'll just see if I can get my screen back so I can share my last slide. Yeah, so let's flick through. So with all of these themes, you really started to see the interconnectedness of everything. And our participants had so many ideas of what makes a well community for them. And we were able to share this with our local community partnership group and with the PCN. And we were already seeing impacts from that. So really, I'd like to encourage everyone that students, and especially the ones that are emerging now, are really engaged in this and want to do more and to use them kind of as an asset as well. If you have any ideas for projects, it's really encouraged me just and embedded in me the idea that I really need to have one ear to the ground at all times, and we need to make sure that patients have the opportunity to advocate not only for themselves but for other people in their communities, and we can transfer power to them so that they can make a difference. But thank you so much for listening, and sorry for the cutting out in the middle there. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia. Apologies for the loss of transmission. She was an absolute trooper. She carried on with the presentation here and wowed everyone.
Just reminds me of when I was a medical student at the London many years ago, and how we were in the medical school and the community was out there, and I don't think there was any kind of recognition that we could be part of the community. And I just want to put a plug for teaching while I've got ears here. So I'm more involved with Barts in the London teaching, but it's wonderful to have the opportunity to help the students feel their place in the community. And we're doing some great projects and things, particularly with the year threes, but bringing that into the curriculum. In fact, which is, I think Anita's going to talk about.
So thank you, Lydia. And we are moving over to James. James with Soil, Seeds and Humanity. Take the stage.
James was actually probably one of the very first people that inspired me to be part of this. He came and talked to the Greener Practice group, and I couldn't believe how you could build a garden in a front concrete space in Stratford. So over to you, James.
I'm delighted to hear that. Verily, so we okay with, if I just wave at you or holler to switch the slides? What's first?
Okay, I'll go and get that sorted.
That's fine. Cool. Well, hello. Thanks for sticking with and all that. Yeah, I'm James. Pronouns he, him. So a bit about me and why I'm here tonight. I'm on a. That's fun. I'm on a postgraduate course called Year Here, and it's training us to sort of create social enterprises. As part of that experience, we spent 5 months in a frontline experience, and I worked in a GP surgery with the First for Health Group, which is a federation of 4 surgeries in Newham. I was based mainly at Stratford Village Surgery, where I shadowed social prescribers for 5 months. So I started getting really interested in the question, how might we build a patient-led community that empowers patients to live healthy, lead great lives? Some of the problems, next slide please, that I came across around this question was that there's a low attendance at the surgery for patient participation groups, historically as well as during COVID and Zoom fatigue. Second problem was that the BCSE network reported low attendance, so there's this wealth of amazing opportunities and activities that are happening in Newham. However, once you've made a referral, it doesn't necessarily mean that the patient's going to turn up. So what's going on there? And the third one is isolation and social anxiety. Next slide, please. Cool. So my hypothesis was around thinking about what like a surgery stands for in the community. And my assumption is that a GP surgery is something that you trust. So I thought, why not try and bring activities and sort of people together at a surgery where they can make the first step of leaving the house, start to tackle their anxiety, meeting new people within a familiar network, which is at the surgery. And then lastly, we wanted to subvert the perception of a GP surgery as a place to go to get better, but actually a place to go to stay well and have it as a hub of creativity. Next slide, please. So why a garden? We all know why we all love gardens for our own reason, but for this, in a practical sense, it was an easy way to bring people together and to do something instead of it just being a chat without a form. There was a reason for us to be there. Next slide, please. So we all know the powerful effect of nature on the human system. But what I think is great, the NHS is sort of tuning into, is that the last bit, for those deprived groups with good access to green and blue spaces, the inequality of mental well-being is narrower compared to those with less access. So that, I guess, kind of inspired us to keep going. Next slide, please. So who's doing it already? I had a great time going around London, sort of seeing all these amazing sort of initiatives like yourself sort of popping up everywhere. And it was really, it was really exciting to see that. Star Lane surgery in Canning Town was particularly exciting because they're a smallish surgery and they have their allotments at the front of the space. And because of COVID, there's long lines of patients outside waiting to get in. I actually saw some social prescribers just passing some spring onions to patients whilst they waited in line. And then that's how they're recruiting people. They're saying this is what's happening, and now they're having chats, much like what's happening here with people outside in the allotments, bringing people into the green space to have these conversations. So yes, please, thanks, Bernice. Next slide. So to test this idea, a 2-hour workshop. So we've got some patients together and a social prescriber, and we went to the local park, we did a mindfulness activity, then we went back, had a cup of tea, soil and seeds. Thomas Antoine, the fellow at the front here, put some music on, and we just chatted and got to know one another, which was great. Next slide, please. So I quickly found out I don't know much about gardening. So I got in touch with the RHS, and an amazing bloke called Chris Young came on board and volunteered hours of his time, obviously as a salaried bloke, but he came on board and helped with 4 gardening sessions. Needed to make sure that he had some recruits for these sessions. So what we did was started texting around 150 patients a week, and we sort of see if they reported sort of isolation problems or anxiety. So this link would have a link to an Eventbrite page where the patient would click on it, watch a video, familiarise themselves with the activity, and then fingers crossed attend. Next slide, please. So session 1 kicked off well. That's Thomas there measuring the space. Chris sort of talking through different types of gardens. Next slide, please. Sorry, next. Yeah, thanks. We wanted to begin to track outcomes with patients. Obviously, lots going on around that space. I chose the ONS4 because it was quick and it was easy to use. What was really interesting was that having conversations using this outcome measurement, it actually provoked conversations around mental health and well-being. And when patients, my initial assumption was it was going to be an awkward encounter doing it in person in space, but actually it kind of framed the whole event around the idea of well-being and mental health. And so it wasn't such perhaps a taboo, but it was something that we're here to sort of work on. Next slide, please. Session 2 was a great opportunity for social prescriber Stefano to meet some of the patients and to sort of begin to discuss the space in more depth. Next slide, please. Spreading the word. So I made a poster that I put in front of the GP surgery with the QR scan, and then that meant that patients could scan through and then start signing up. And we also, a bit more old school, I suppose, chalk on the ground, and we actually got some footfall, getting interested in coming into the surgery to talk about it. Next slide, please. Session 3. So we've spoken about it tonight, actually, about just sort of people coming together and sort of doing it themselves. I think this is a really good indicator of that. So Caroline, the lady sitting down on the right, brought a lot of her surplus food from her own allotment. And she not only brought that, but she brought a wealth of experience and charisma, and was just fantastic. So we had some great food that night. Next slide, please. So resources. During the first couple of weeks of my placement, it was Mental Health Week, and Mental Health Foundation and WWF got together and have created a beautiful booklet. So some amazing people here are going to showcase this amazing booklet. I'd love it to be, people on Zoom might not be able to see it now, but there's a book and I'd love you all to leave with a couple. It's an amazing guide about how mental health and nature connect. Yes, please, thank you. There's also a PDF online. Really recommend it if you go to Mental Health Foundation. And they kindly donated some copies to the surgery in order to sort of spread, but they're really good. Next slide, please. Oh. What's the title? Thriving with Nature, a guide for everyone. Great, thank you. Cool, so we're steering towards the end now. So, just to recap. Okay, so session 4, the last session. Yeah, this was cool. This was great. Lots of people. I think you can really see the space at the back. What's going on? They want to now. The community now want to build raised beds at the back. They want artists to come in and paint the murals. Yeah, this was an excellent thing where the family next door came along as well. I just knocked on their door 2 hours before, and you can see in the next door neighbour they've got an amazing garden. And then they came over with the whole family. I think it was really something special about just 3-year-olds planting seeds alongside sort of 82-year-olds. I think it's really great. Next slide, please. So here we go, really briefly. This is the front of the surgery. The community, when we sort of co-designed this, they said that they wanted to be aesthetically pleasing, to sort of attract attention. We're on Romford Road, where the surgery is, very busy road. So we wanted to sort of talk about this, the perception of a surgery. Like, what's this lovely big garden doing out in front of Romford Road? That's so odd. That's the idea. It's also an opportunity for patients to relax after receiving some difficult news, perhaps. Next slide, please. Back. So this is where we want it to be more for sort of staff, I suppose, but also for the for the community to grow their veg. Next slide. Staying connected. We set up a WhatsApp group where the group is still communicating, talking, and sharing ideas and staying up to date with new information. And then Capital Growth is a brilliant platform to sort of where the surgery is now linked in, and so volunteers from around London can now come and sort of get involved with the surgery's allotment as well. Next slide. Next steps. So Dream Green is a brilliant social enterprise, about 2 years old, and their focus is for guerrilla gardening. They've just awarded us a £100 grant, and that's going towards being like a participatory budget where the surgery gets to decide, or the patients get to decide what to do with it. And then lastly, Greener Practice, just on the right. We've just finished submitting a grant for Grow Back Greener, and fingers crossed in October, we'll have some money to put towards a recovery ranger, who will be there all year to sort of help grow this garden. I think that's the video.
Greener Practice.
Woohoo! I don't think we have time for video. There were some reflections, but perhaps I could disperse that some other time. But yeah, that's me.
Brilliant. In person, it's really nice to have people actually here.
Absolutely. Thank you, James. That's absolutely phenomenal and brilliant slides. Gave us so much information and so many links. Lots of ideas. So,
Chad.
Moving over to, yes, Chad, we're coming over to you. Brilliant. I can see you, Chad. Anita's.
Hello, hi. So my name's Chad Hockey. I'm a GP in West London and a clinical director for our PCN. I don't know if Lydia's still with you, but it's absolutely fantastic to see you again. I'm so pleased. I wish I could catch up through your talk. So Lily contacted me last week and said, record something in a place that's meaningful for you. So I'm not in the Himalayas, the background behind me. I'm actually in a shed in the garden. Had I been able to record somewhere meaningful, it might have been 1960s America. That's where I'd have liked to have been. So instead I watched a film, and the film was Crip Camp. I don't know if anyone's watched it. It's on Netflix at the moment. And it's set in, at least it starts off with its story, set in a place called Camp Jened in New York State. And it's the story of some teenagers with disabilities who go on a summer camp, effectively. That's the start of the story anyway. And what it really is a social experiment where they create this utopia in this Camp Jened, where these teenagers can have a normal teenage life. They can hang out with other teenagers. They can do all the things that teenagers do. And then at the end of it, they go back to society. And the second part of the story is that realization that actually they're not the ones with the problem. It's everybody else, the non-disabled parts of our society, that are the ones that have the problem. And what the rest of the film goes on to show is this movement that they created, which turned into disability activism. And this small group of disabled teenagers that went to this camp completely transformed what happened across the world for disability rights. That's the rest of the film. And I think that's completely relevant to tonight, because what I've been hearing over the past hour or so since I've been able to join is the same sort of narrative coming from everybody. It's a story of inclusion, people at the grassroots just getting on and doing things, people that have the confidence in their own abilities, people that are coming together around a sense of purpose, connecting around that sense of purpose, using a different way to create change, not depending on the system to come down and do something, but just going ahead and doing it themselves. And it's the same sort of story that everyone's really telling, just different versions of the same sort of story. And that's kind of why I'm mentioning it, because that's my story as well. Before I became a PCNCD, and I can now, in my role as a PCNCD, really see the ways in which systems don't enable that kind of emergent change to happen. So people on the call, I'm sure, that have come to some of the deep end sessions. So one of the things I did as a GP was I felt very isolated, and so I frustrated with just giving out pills to people, and so just got on my bike and cycled around local practices and found a whole load of GPs that thought the same way, and brought them together in a version of the deep end scheme in northwest London, to try and share their experiences, have a commonality of purpose. Managed to get some funding, just knocked on enough doors to be given the money, mainly to be sent away, I think. And then, of course, didn't go away, just came back for more money. But on the back of that, we had 16 people came through a scheme, and that generated 94 people actually attending face to face. And the purpose of it was kind of like that Camp Jened thing. It wasn't about saying to them, you must do X or Y or Z. It was more about, can we change a person? Can we switch them on, activate them, change the way they're thinking? And I've got no idea what they're going to do later, but they're going to be a different person at the end of it. And I think that's one of the things that systems could do as we're moving into whatever it is that we move into with the ICS world. One of the things that systems could do is try and facilitate these kind of social movements to start to grow and happen. So I'm conscious that we're running short on time. I'm not going to go into details of various things that have happened over the past year, but I think if that's one takeaway message, if you're thinking about how we change things, is actually we can all change things. This is people-powered health. Every single one of us, whether it's from a commissioner through to somebody working in the community to somebody that's retired, every single one of us has the capacity to change things for the better within our communities. And we just have to connect around that sense of purpose and believe that we can have the confidence to do it. And systems, I think, have to create the kind of culture and environment through which that kind of thing can flourish. That's me done.
Thank you, Chad. Thanks so much. Thanks. Thank you for coming this evening. I know, Anita, you're waiting in the wings. Anita, we can see you. I can see you. Hey.
Hi, I'm painfully aware of the time and that I'm sort of bringing up the rear. Shani or Sally, do stop me, and quite a lot of what I might want to say has sort of already been touched on, but just to introduce myself. So I'm a GP actually in northwest London, not far from Chad, but I also work at Barts in the London Medical School at QMUL, and I'm the lead there for the community-based medical education for the medical students. So my focus is on how do we get the 18, 19, 20-year-olds to think in the way that everybody tonight is thinking, in this creative and passionate way. As Dan started off by talking about health creation, and I think that it requires creative thinking amongst our future doctors. So Sally mentioned that I work with her, but I know I work indirectly with many of the people on the call today. Our students do some of the similar things to some of the fantastic, wonderful students who've presented today, some of whom I think have been inspired by Chad himself. And those of you who joined Lily and Shani and Sally in February will have heard quite a lot of our students presenting. But the key thing about the medical school, and I see it a little bit like we're gardeners, we're tilling the soil so that our seedlings will grow. And the medical school at Barts London at QM is unique. And I think it's unique, certainly amongst London medical schools, that we only, and by design, only place students in East London. And so we see ourselves as part of East London, and we partner, the medical school is partnering with over 100 GP practices, and that's over 190 active teachers. And increasingly we're involving people that Noreen, for example, has been responsible for trainees and doing as much near peer teaching as possible. But we've also moved to doing a lot more co-production, so actually working with our students and with our GP tutors to design what we do. And we don't see ourselves as just placement organisers. We really see ourselves as working to make sure that our students are no longer just, as Sally said, sort of peripheral participants, just watching or being on the edge of community or even floating above the surface of it. But we want our students to feel really part of it. So one of the things that Shani and Sally asked me to talk about was sort of change that we've made recently. And I think, as I say, I think the key is that we want to create a sense of community because we know that students who have a sense of place and a sense of belonging and inclusion have stronger identities and much greater agency. And I think some of the things we were talking about before, and particularly the changes related to the really big issues locally, such as food poverty, violence, and issues around homelessness and housing, for example, and then the bigger global issues around the environment, need students to feel that when they graduate they have agency. And I was very struck by the young person who was saying, how do I remain positive when I feel overwhelmed? And it's how do we build? So we're looking at lots of ways of building in. So 3 positive things that we've tried to do, or let me say 4. One is helping students feel connected and connect with their own humanity, to especially because the pandemic was horrible for everybody. It was shocking for the students, but they also had a terrible time of trying to learn to be doctors online a lot of the time. And we've been very lucky with the support we've had with connecting students with each other, with GPs, and wonderful response to GPs becoming mentors for students. So if you have a bit of time and you think about the new approach to appraisal, we're looking for mentors for students. So that's only a few hours a month, but it's so appreciated. We've also introduced the community diagnosis, where students are focused on understanding not just individuals and individual practices, but a community, and it's to understand rather than to judge. So to understand where you get data from, understand why and how communities work and move, and to understand the structural factors that impact on health, but by being there, walking the streets or getting on their bikes, as Chad described. And finally, we've worked really hard on trying to make the students actively contribute, and so that they are not just on the edge, but they're actually providing care. And many of you will know that students were incredibly active in vaccination clinics, and we hope they'll be active again in the booster services. But the really key thing that we've done is get students more directly involved in patient care. And our final year students this year have for the first time done an 8-week assistantship. And the wonderful thing about that is the type of things they've said about their experience. But the most important thing is we've gone from about 25% of our graduating students saying they would be considering a career in general practice to about 70% of our students considering a career in general practice. And we just desperately need more tutors, because we know we need more doctors. We know that the number of GPs practicing nationally is decreased, and that's very true for East London. So we've got 25% more patients per doctor. So we need more doctors. What we've done is we recruited a heck of a lot more medical students. So this year we've gone from 400 to 500 undergraduate intake. So if you want to inspire and nurture the little seeds and grow the seedlings, there's a lot of very, very wonderful work to be done. So follow Sally's lead. I think I'm gonna close there.
Oh, thank you. It's yeah, thank you, Anita. I think you said it all really. And well, I love teaching, as you know, and I know that lots of maybe the younger GPs could find a real passion and maybe a sort of way out of the feeling of hopelessness by getting involved with teaching. But anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, Anita. And I think it was really inspiring to hear, and also just how you connect them with health equity and the deprivation and all the working in the deep end. And that's just so important, isn't it? Because that's what it's about, really. Just making them feel, and also how it feels to be a student during this time, how difficult it's been for them. So well done to all the students and to you.
And just a plug we're going to put the videos up on the faculty website from day 1 and day 2. And day 1 had some great stuff with the students, particularly one of my MedSoc students, who's now 2nd year, who did a beautiful piece of artwork. Felt as proud as if she'd been my own daughter.
Right.
So sad. Sorry.
Thank you. And we're going to move over to, we're going to introduce Amber.
Yeah.
Yes. So Amber is going to talk to us about how sharing insights across London's city farms and community gardens strengthens delivery. Thank you, Amber.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? Put your thumbs up.
Brilliant.
Okay, great. And I'm going to try and share my slides. Is that working? Let's see.
Yeah, perfect.
Can you see the slides there? Yeah, okay, great. So I'm going to rattle through these. Thanks very much for your time, everybody. I'm very picture-based here. So I work for Social Farms and Gardens London, and basically we are an infrastructure organisation. We link people so they can share insights and have fun. We work with lots of the people you've spoken about, like Capital Growth and RHS and different partners in London. And we have members, they do all sorts of things, including social prescribing, but also, food distribution, gardening training, young farms programs. There's 13 city farms in London, and here we've got some kind of pictures of, for example, Holloway Road, and then the Tranquil Freightliners Farm, Vauxhall City Farm, just by MI6, and Kentish Town City Farm, which you can see from London Overground. It's a good example as well. And Woodlands Farm Trust is the biggest farm, which is in South East London in Greenwich. And there's over 3,000 community gardens in London, and they might range from a very large place like Wolves Lane, pictured there on the right, through to a couple of
Cordova and I am a research associate at the Centre for Trials Research at Cardiff University. Research shows that clinical trials often lack the ethnic diversity typically seen in real patients, and that minority ethnic patients have often worse experiences when accessing treatment. For research to improve the health of our communities, that research needs to represent the interests of everyone in them. To achieve this, we need to start talking to communities traditionally excluded from research, and more importantly, start listening to what they say. Over the spring and summer 2021, we held a series of workshops with an ethnically diverse group of 15 co-researchers, mainly residents of Riverside and Grangetown in Cardiff. We discussed clinical trials, what they are and why they are important, and we explored perceptions and views on clinical trials amongst the group. Throughout the project, we collaborated with Catherine, the artist educator, who co-facilitated the workshops and provided materials for the group to produce artwork. This proved to be a really inclusive way of gathering input from all the group, despite the language barriers.
My name is Sarah Bridges and I'm a trial manager at the Centre for Trials Research in Cardiff University. The change in perceptions of clinical trials has been startling over these 3 workshops. We hope we can continue this work by supporting our co-researchers to access further training and become more actively involved in research.
Hello, I'm Catherine, and as a participatory artist and medical educator and researcher, the Talking Trials project ticked all of my boxes. I'm really happy to be able to share with you the process that we were involved in terms of multisensory engagement with the participants. So the project started in the second lockdown. It was a delayed start, and so therefore all of our workshops and sessions were remote. The main stay of the art workshops was sending arts materials through the post to all of the participants, including Martina and Sarah, and then getting together on Zoom for 2 or 3 hours for a session where the participants would be introduced to a topic and then spend at least 20 minutes working with the materials, come back together again and consider each other's work, reflect together on the process of the day and how the dialogue had developed into the various themes. My role then was to document, reflect and keep those themes present as I sent further materials as the workshops continued. One of the enormous advantages of working remotely, which was a great surprise to me, was how friends and family within the households were so supportive to the participants who certainly wouldn't have English as first language and often became quite involved in the artistic process themselves. So I'm now going to briefly refer to the images that you have already seen when Martina and Sarah were contextualising the project. There are just 3 of the 8 final panels which reflected our conversations and dialogue and the multisensory approach. And they looked at aspects like what is community, what are the obstacles to co-creating health, and the sort of personal challenges and commitment to actually signing up and the trust, if you like, involved in the medical profession to be involved in such a deep way with clinical trials. Some of the art pieces that you will have seen were the original pieces which were produced on the Zoom or perhaps worked into a little bit later. Some are pieces that I worked in collaboration with the participants by supplying materials and going back and forward by email to help support their ideas. And occasionally there are some pieces which have been gifted by artists who were working in a similar theme, and I introduced them to the artist to see if this would have some sort of resonance.